Welcome to the Right News Network.
Welcome to your World News Update. I'm Emma, bringing you today's top stories from around the globe. Vladimir Putin says the war in Ukraine is heading toward an end. It's a significant claim, coming just as a US-backed ceasefire kicked off. But here's the problem. Within hours, both sides were accusing each other of violations. We want to bring in Alex Park, our technology correspondent, who's been tracking the diplomatic developments and what they actually mean for the region. Alex, what's Putin really signaling here?
Yeah, Emma. Look, on the surface, this sounds like good news, right? Peace talks potentially moving forward. But what I'm hearing from sources in Brussels and Kiev is that Putin's framing this very carefully. He's saying the war's ending, but only if the West stops backing Zelensky. That's not a peace offer, Emma. That's a demand wrapped in diplomatic language. And frankly, that's the calculation everyone's wrestling with right now.
So is he negotiating in good faith or playing for time?
That's the question keeping everyone up at night. What's striking is, even as Putin's talking peace, his forces are still contesting territory that Ukraine's actually been winning back. The ceasefires collapsed within hours. I was speaking to a NATO official this morning who said they're treating these statements as tactical moves, not strategic shifts. Russia may be using a negotiating pause to reposition, rearm, and come back stronger.
Alex Park, thanks for the clarity. Continuing on world, a ceasefire in Lebanon is falling apart. Israeli strikes killed 39 people on Saturday alone. We're hearing that includes a 6-month-old infant. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari is tracking developments. Layla, how quickly did this escalate?
Yeah, Emma. And frankly, this caught a lot of people off guard. We're talking about a ceasefire that was supposed to hold, announced just weeks ago. What I'm hearing from sources on the ground in Beirut is that the strikes came without warning. Saturday morning, multiple locations across the country. The scale and speed, it suggests this wasn't some tactical response. This looks deliberate, Emma. A choice to restart operations.
Why would Israel walk away from a deal that was just negotiated?
Look, both sides are accusing each other of violations. Israel says Hezbollah attacked first, that they had no choice but to respond. But here's what's significant. The Lebanese government is calling this a complete breach of the agreement. And I was speaking to a diplomatic source this morning who told me neither side actually trusts the ceasefire framework. There's no real enforcement mechanism. So when tensions spike, and they do, there's nothing stopping either side from just resuming the war.
Layla, thanks for that reporting. Still on world affairs, Iran's now formally responded to Washington's latest ceasefire proposal. The catch? Nobody's saying what's actually in either message. Layla is still with us. Layla, why is Pakistan suddenly the middleman in all this?
Yeah, Emma. And that's actually the significant part here. Pakistan doesn't have a dog in this fight, which is exactly why both sides trust them. What I'm hearing from sources this morning is that Tehran and Washington have basically stopped talking directly. So Pakistan becomes the go-between. The Iranians send their response to Islamabad. Islamabad forwards it to the Americans. Same thing in reverse. It's slower, frankly, but it gives both sides plausible deniability.
What's Iran actually asking for in a deal?
Look, here's the picture. Iran's not interested in a ceasefire that just pauses the fighting. They want guarantees. They want assurances in writing that the U.S. won't attack them again, that there won't be another strike on Iranian soil 6 months from now. That's the sticking point. The Americans say they'll talk about de-escalation. The Iranians say, show us legally binding commitments. And frankly, Emma, closing that gap is going to take time.
Layla, thanks. A virus outbreak on a cruise ship in Spanish waters has forced an international evacuation. 3 people have died. Now passengers are heading home. And Alex is back with us. Alex, where exactly are we with this operation right now?
Yeah, Emma. The ship, the MV Hondius, is anchored off Tenerife in the Canary Islands, and passengers started coming off yesterday. We're talking Spanish nationals first, then British, other Europeans. They're being bussed to quarantine facilities and then flown out. What I'm hearing from health officials is this is moving faster than expected. The coordination between Spain and these other governments has been pretty seamless.
How serious is this hantavirus outbreak compared to what we saw with COVID?
Look, this is completely different, and experts are being very clear about that. 3 deaths aboard, several infected, but human-to-human transmission with hantavirus is rare. I spoke this morning with a medical source who told me the virus doesn't spread like coronavirus did. This outbreak is contained. The bigger picture here is that this incident is exposing gaps in how we respond to medical emergencies at sea. Testing speed, communication protocols. That's what's keeping health officials up at night more than the virus itself.
Alex Park, thanks for the update. The Trump administration says it's just pulled highly enriched uranium out of Venezuela, but it's what they didn't get that's telling. For more on what this means for nuclear security in the Persian Gulf region, we turn to Marcus Webb, our Washington correspondent. Marcus, the U.S. took 13.5 kilograms from Caracas. So why are we even talking about this when Iran's sitting on 408?
Yeah, Emma. And that's exactly the right question. Look, what the administration is doing here is real. Removing enriched uranium is a legitimate non-proliferation win. But you've hit on the central tension. They're publicizing this Venezuelan operation as a major victory, while Iran's stockpile is nearly 30 times larger. I was speaking to a senior official this morning who described it to me as symbolic momentum. But that language alone tells you they know the scale problem is real.
So what's the actual endgame here with Iran?
Well, that's where it gets complicated. Republican lawmakers like Marco Waltz are now saying it's President Trump's call to determine whether Iran's violated any ceasefire. But retired Admiral McRaven pushed back hard on that framing, saying there's no ceasefire when both sides are actively shooting at each other. And frankly, that gap between what administration officials want to claim and what's actually happening on the ground in the Persian Gulf, that's where the real pressure is building.
Marcus Webb, thanks. Also on the world front, that ceasefire lasted about a day. President Trump announced a 3-day truce between Ukraine and Russia on Friday, but by Sunday, both sides were firing accusations at each other. Ukrainian officials say Russian attacks wounded at least 9 people, claiming Moscow broke the deal first. Russia fired back, saying Kyiv was the real culprit. Meanwhile, Ukraine kept striking Russian oil refineries. The real question now, the Trump administration's sending envoys to Moscow this week. Can they salvage this? Or are we just watching round 2 of failed diplomacy play out in real time? Energy Secretary Chris Wright just told NBC News the Trump administration is open to suspending the federal gas tax. Why? Fuel prices are climbing as tensions escalate in the Persian Gulf, the world's most vital oil choke point. Wright says the administration's focused on 2 things right now: ending Iran's nuclear program and keeping shipping lanes secure through the Strait of Hormuz. The question is whether those diplomatic efforts can move fast enough before higher prices start hurting American households and the broader economy. Still on world, the hunger crisis spreading from Iran to Asia's farms. Families can't afford bread, farmers can't afford seed. Marcus, what's actually happening on the ground right now?
Yeah, Emma. What I'm hearing from agricultural officials in Bangkok and rural Thailand is a real sense of panic. These farmers are making brutal calculations. The cost of fertilizer has tripled. Fuel prices are through the roof. And because of what's happening in the Persian Gulf, the blockade, the shipping chaos, even getting inputs into the region has become a gamble. So they're doing something unprecedented. They're walking away from planting season entirely.
That's a choice that could take years to recover from. Why aren't governments stepping in?
Well, and this is what's significant. Most of these Asian governments are already stretched thin. Subsidies drain treasuries. And frankly, Emma, the connection between Iran's economic collapse and Thai farmers isn't something they can solve alone. This isn't a domestic problem anymore. It's a regional supply chain catastrophe, and it's accelerating.
Marcus Webb, thanks. Wall Street's biggest law firms built their fortune on a simple promise: keep our secrets safe. But tonight, we're learning that promise is increasingly fragile. A new investigation shows how the most prestigious legal advisors in the country have become unwitting pipelines for insider trading, with attorneys using confidential deal information for personal profit. The question now is whether tighter rules and harder criminal penalties can close a loophole that's existed in plain sight for decades. Residents in Georgia got a shock when their water pressure dropped last year. Turns out a massive data center nearby was secretly using 30 million gallons, and nobody was watching. It's the latest sign that as AI explodes, our water systems are getting stretched to the breaking point. Tonight, we're looking at how data centers are outpacing the infrastructure designed to manage them.
Now, our in-depth analysis of the day. The story dominating the headlines, examined from every angle.
Three people are dead, passengers are being airlifted across multiple continents, and the world is once again scrambling to contain an outbreak from a virus we have known about for decades. The MV Hondias cruise ship became the site of a hantavirus emergency that sent Spanish, British, and international nationals fleeing to hospitals in Johannesburg, the Netherlands, and Tenerife. Experts are urging calm, saying this is nothing like COVID. But the fact that we have no vaccine and no treatment for a virus documented since the Korean War is a question that demands a serious answer. Joining me now are Alex Park, our technology and science analyst, and Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst. Alex, let me start with you. Is the institutional response to this outbreak evidence that post-COVID preparedness spending was essentially wasted?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I'll be direct. Yes, almost entirely wasted, and the MV Hondias situation is the proof. We were told, after COVID, that the world had learned its lessons. CEPI was funded, the WHO's priority pathogen list was updated, G7 governments signed preparedness frameworks, and here we are in 2026. 3 people dead on a cruise ship from a virus that has been killing people since the Korean War. And the global response toolkit is supportive care and a prayer. No vaccine, no targeted antiviral. Christian Brechot from the Institut Pasteur is right that human-to-human transmission is rare, and this isn't COVID, I'll grant him that. But he also said himself that we need faster testing and stronger outbreak response systems. That's an admission of failure, not a reassurance. Ben Shapiro has made this point brilliantly. Government institutions optimize for the last crisis, not the next one. Every dollar spent on mRNA infrastructure, every bureaucratic pandemic preparedness committee, and hantavirus research still sits at early stage. The uncomfortable truth is that we built a COVID machine, not a public health system.
But Alex, devil's advocate here, isn't it unreasonable to expect governments to have vaccines and treatments ready for every single pathogen on a list? Resources are finite, and the experts are saying this is contained. Isn't there a risk you're crying wolf? And Marcus, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I think Alex is making a valid point, but framing it slightly too broadly. Here's what I think Alex is missing. This isn't really about whether we vaccinated against every possible pathogen. It's about triage failure and incentive structures. The market doesn't develop hantavirus treatments because it primarily kills people in rural and remote environments without the purchasing power to make a blockbuster drug commercially viable. That's a real market gap, but governments, particularly post-COVID governments, flush with preparedness funding, were specifically supposed to fill that gap. The CDC data is damning here. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome has a 38% case fatality rate in the United States. That's not a minor rodent problem. And the fact that a 69-year-old British passenger ended up in intensive care in Johannesburg rather than being swiftly repatriated tells you everything about the state of coordinated response. The logistics were improvised. The protocols were reactive. 3 people died, and we're still debating whether to worry.
I hear what Marcus is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. He's treating this as a resourcing problem. It's not. It's a prioritization problem driven by institutional politics. The WHO has had hantavirus on its priority pathogen list for years. Years. And the vaccine pipeline is essentially empty in Western markets. South Korea has a licensed vaccine for the HFRS variant. We don't. That is a political and bureaucratic failure, not a resource failure. And I'll go further. If you look at what Western health bureaucracies have been focused on post-COVID, it's been theatre, digital health passports, equity frameworks in medical research prioritization, DEI mandates embedded in funding criteria. Meanwhile, a virus with a 38% kill rate in its pulmonary form has no treatment. That should be a scandal. It should have politicians answering questions in Parliament. Instead, we're getting press conferences about how this isn't COVID.
Here's what I want to know, and this is the forward-looking question that really matters. If we see secondary cases emerge among repatriated passengers in the coming weeks, does this containment story fall apart completely, and who bears political responsibility? Marcus, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, the most likely outcome is that containment holds, secondary transmission stays minimal because the epidemiology genuinely does not favor it, and the story fades within a fortnight. But here's the trajectory I'm watching very carefully. The political aftermath. There are forces in Brussels and within the WHO treaty negotiation process that have been waiting for exactly this kind of event to push for expanded supranational health governance. If cases start popping up in repatriated passengers across Europe, watch for the argument that national health systems can't handle this alone and that we need centralized European health authority. That power grab is the real risk here, not the virus itself.
Here's what concerns me most: the 2-week window. Hantavirus has an incubation period that can run up to 8 weeks in some cases, though typically 2 to 4 weeks. Passengers have already dispersed to Spain, Britain, and multiple other countries. If those individuals are not being actively monitored with the right serological testing, and Brescio himself said rapid testing capability needs to be improved, we could be in a situation where cases emerge in GP surgeries and emergency rooms where clinicians have never seen hantavirus before. The risk is a diagnostic delay compounding a medical emergency. National governments need to be proactive right now in briefing their health systems, not reactive, not waiting for the WHO's next situation report. If Rishi's successor in Downing Street, whoever's running British health policy, isn't on the phone to NHS trusts about this today, that's a failure of sovereign responsibility.
Alex Park, Marcus Webb, genuinely important analysis tonight and a story that isn't finished yet. One thing is certain, the MV Hondius may be docking in Tenerife, but the bill for decades of hantavirus neglect hasn't been paid yet. Vladimir Putin stands on Red Square, framed by tanks and missiles, and tells the world the Ukraine war is heading to an end. On the very same day, a U.S.-brokered ceasefire collapses amid mutual accusations of violations. He proposes Gerhard Schroeder, an 82-year-old Kremlin loyalist, as a peace mediator, and the West responds with polite skepticism rather than outright fury. And Ukrainian forces are reportedly making battlefield gains even as Moscow talks peace. Something doesn't add up here, or maybe it adds up exactly as Putin intended. Joining me now are Elena Vasquez, our Europe and EU analyst, and Alex Park, our technology and science analyst. Elena, let me start with you. Is Putin genuinely seeking an exit, or is he playing the West for fools again?
Thanks, Emma. Let me be absolutely direct. This is a trap, and the West is sleepwalking into it. Putin doesn't announce peace from a position of weakness. He announces it from a position of calculated advantage. He's holding significant Ukrainian territory. The ceasefire fell apart within hours on day one, and he's proposing Gerhard Schroeder as a mediator, a man who was lobbying for Russian gas pipelines while Ukrainian cities were being bombed. That's not a peace proposal. That's an insult delivered with a straight face. Douglas Murray has been warning for years that every time the West mistakes Russian tactical pauses for genuine de-escalation, Russia uses that pause to rearm, reposition, and return stronger. We've been through Minsk I and Minsk II. We know exactly how this story ends. What concerns me most is that European leaders, exhausted by 3 years of this conflict, are desperately searching for a reason to believe Putin's signals are real this time. They're not.
But Elena, devil's advocate here, Sky News is reporting Ukrainian battlefield gains. If Kiev is actually winning on the ground, Why shouldn't the West use this moment of relative Ukrainian strength to lock in a negotiated settlement? And Alex, what's your read on the strategic picture?
Well, look, I think Elena's instincts are right, but I'd push back on the framing that this is purely a geopolitical chess game and nothing else matters. There's a real economic dimension here that keeps getting ignored. Ukraine's economy contracted 30% in 2022 alone. The US has committed over $100 billion in aid. European energy markets were catastrophically distorted by the conflict. At some point, the data forces you to ask, what does a sustainable endgame actually look like? Now, I'm not saying take Putin's word for it, obviously don't do that. But the ceasefire, even a fragile one, creates conditions where economic reconstruction can begin, where markets can stabilize, where the real long-term cost of this war to Western economies can be honestly assessed. The free market case for peace, even an imperfect peace, is stronger than the foreign policy establishment wants to admit.
With respect, Alex, that completely misses the point. I hear what he's saying about economics, but you can't build sustainable markets on stolen land. You can't have reconstruction when Russia is still holding Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson. The moment you accept a frozen conflict, you reward aggression. Full stop. And then what? China watches, China calculates. Taiwan becomes the next test case. This isn't abstract geopolitics. This is the foundational principle of national sovereignty. Once you let one nuclear-armed autocrat take a neighbor's territory and pay no real strategic price, you've told every other autocrat on the planet that the rules don't apply to them. Putin isn't offering peace. He's offering the West a way to feel good about accepting his conquest. That's not peace. That's surrender with a ribbon on it.
Here's what I want to know. Putin's floating Schroeder as mediator? The ceasefire's already broken down, and Hungary's Orbán appears to be on his way out. Does Western unity on Ukraine actually have a realistic chance of holding? And where does this go from here? Alex, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out over the next several months is a negotiating theater that serves Putin's primary objective: time. Every week of ceasefire talk is a week Russia isn't losing ground. The Orbán exit is genuinely significant. National Review's right about that, because it removes the most reliable EU veto on Ukrainian support. But here's the critical data point. If Western governments use ceasefire negotiations as political cover to quietly reduce military aid to Ukraine, which is what the trajectory suggests when you look at the domestic political pressures in Washington and Berlin, then Putin doesn't need to win on the battlefield. He just needs to wait while his opponent's resolve erodes from within.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario nobody in the mainstream media wants to say out loud. We could be looking at a deal that the Trump administration brokers, that it calls a win, that gives Russia de facto recognition of its territorial gains in exchange for a ceasefire that holds for 3 or 4 years, and then collapses again when Russia is ready. We've seen this movie before. Twice. With Minsk I and Minsk II. And every time we've seen it, we've pretended it's a diplomatic achievement. The real risk here isn't that the war continues, it's that the West negotiates in a way that makes the next war inevitable. That is what history tells us to fear.
Elena Vasquez and Alex Park, fierce, unsparing, and uncomfortably close to the truth on all counts. One thing's for certain. The man in the Kremlin is betting that Western leaders will choose the comfort of a bad deal over the difficulty of a just one. And right now, he's got very good odds.
That's all for this update. Stay informed and stay connected. I'm Emma. We'll be back shortly.